When we're looking at asset management data and information standards, we need to understand to what extent do we go in terms of the rigor of our data identification, the management of that data, retention, and of course the disposal. So we need to define which standards that we will use. And that could of course be predetermined by the industry that you're in, looking at the specifications and even some of the guidelines for how we use the asset data. We need to ensure that data is again consistent, accurate, but also comparable across the organisation, and wherever possible, comparable and complementary across the life cycle. We want to support the integration between the different systems that we have at our disposal, and they may be large corporate systems, they may be more discrete, but also how they actually integrate between stakeholders. Aligning with wider data, digital and information frameworks. If your organisation is under an ISO 27001 management system, well, that will predetermine that. You might be working for defence, you might be working around quite private information. All these things will actually be inputs to that consideration. But again, the final point here, making sure that information is always fit for purpose, trusted, and supports broader decision making. A reality out there along the life cycle, whether you're an internal or an external stakeholder, is there's a real risk that people just don't consistently apply standards. You might have someone in one area of the business that's very meticulous and really good at their configuration, where others kind of understand it should be done, but actually don't do it. To get around this adoption of standards, we need to look at providing training, guidance, and embed standards into contracts and procedures going into the activity, not trying to get it adopted during the activity. That is a key mistake that many organizations make. And again, if we invite commercial, IT, and of course the life cycle accountable managers to a discussion earlier on, we can actually ensure, not just assure, but ensure that the adoption of standards is undertaken properly. Resistance to change is a real key risk. People resist moving from those legacy practices to new data standards. It can feel like a lot of hard work. It feels like extra burden placed onto their day-to-day activities. But a way around this is not only to use change champions and look at how we roll these things out, it's bringing it back to the why. We aren't doing this to you as an individual, but your support in gathering or identifying and gathering and managing data on behalf of the organization to support decisions is where we want to get to. That actually supports not only the organization, not only the life cycle, but at the end of the day, it will actually support the individual because they may be able to demonstrate that they need greater capacity to abide by the data standard in the long run. The shape of data, the use of data, the understanding of data will vary throughout an organization. If I might be, for instance, in engineering, designing the fit, form, and function of a particular physical asset, well, I will look at data completely different to someone maybe over in supply chain who is merely ordering from a MRP system. The risk here is with different functions defining and using data differently, it can lead to confusion, it can lead to overlaps and of course gaps. What we need to do is establish that cross-functional data governance committee or committees. And one of the best ways to do this is to leverage an asset management steerco, if you have one, that considers how information is translated across the life cycle. Because information used in design, in construction, in support, in maintenance and operations will vary. But again, the cross-functional consistency is important, which brings us back to the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from assets. When we think of the term system interoperability, come back to that broader integration piece. It's the sum of all the IT systems, all the OT systems working together to provide consistency to support our workflows, processes, and at the end of the day, and most ultimately, informed decision making. So the risk here is both IT and operational systems can't share or interpret data consistently. Again, that's why this whole module around information and data standards is so important. So we need to align standards with IT integration strategies and test that interoperability. If I'm in IT, I might be looking at things like the ITIL, Information Technology Infrastructure Library. That'd be one set of standards. But if in the business, I might actually see if I can dovetail that into ISO 8000 and the series of standards within that, because that also can then test what is we need to actually have by way of data and information, but how do we make sure it can actually integrate and interface across the organization and across the life cycle to support decision making. When we're relying on contractors and suppliers in order to feed us with data, information, as-built drawings, configuration, handover, handoff, warranties, structured data, unstructured data, it's really important that where possible, external parties provide the data in formats that match the organizational standards. Now, the world is not perfect, the world is not flat, and sometimes we have to contend with the fact that the contractor may be quite niche, small, and can't actually abide by our standards. We need to be pragmatic. But if up front we can talk about the data standards in procurement, how we actually onboard those suppliers and contractors accordingly, at least we know up front in the process if they can or cannot. I have seen mistakes where organizations inflict this on contractors and suppliers without talking about the why, and all it's led is neglect, anger, and sometimes unnecessary variations. It's one thing to adopt a standard or a suite of standards. It's another thing to make sure they remain relevant and fit for purpose for the organization as a whole. So the risk of them becoming outdated is quite real. Technology is moving fast. Legislation and regulation is often changing as well. So we need to make sure we review and update standards regularly, but also with stakeholder input. Even if you are out there under an IEEE or an ISO standard and you believe you don't need the entire standard to be fit for purpose for your organization, call it out. It'll probably look better for you in the eyes of your stakeholders because you actually understand what's required in your organization. But again, keeping standards relevant is key. And if you're unsure, don't just keep asking for more standards. Stop and have a think about it. Two key sections of 55,001 spring to mind. Of course, section 7.5, documented information. In that section, you're really calling out, well, what are the standards, the depth, the breadth that you expect documented information to be contained within? Section 8.1, operational planning and control, including lifecycle management. But an adjacent standard in ISO, which was released in 2024, is ISO 55013. If you take a look at that, at least in principle, that can also provide you guidance for having data and information as an asset, but also too in supporting decision making. So in summary, data and information standards create a common language so everyone records and uses asset data in the same way. This should be considered across the life cycle of assets and how that contributes to service or product delivery. It also needs to consider the attitude and appetite and the ability of the organization to actually govern against each of those standards. A organization just starting off may wish to actually refer to the alignment to a particular data standard, where those that are more mature, especially those under, say, an ISO 27001 management system, may extend that and be a little bit more prescriptive.